Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I want to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. We are in Contact 31, Billy's trip in the Great Spacer. I've got a kind of a overview of the first part of this contact that I'd like to read to you. Then we're going to play some clips, particularly a clip about Venus. On Thursday, July 17th, 1975, at about 10:14 a.m., Billy and his equipment ascends into Semjase's spaceship in a transport beam. Billy photographs the ship's departure point, and this ship shoots off in directions like a pendulum without Billy being able to feel any acceleration or external forces. So in July 17th, 1975, Billy is in Semjase's ship, and they're going to take a quick trip around our solar system before they get to this mothership, which is called the Great Spacer. Semjase explains they're going first to Venus, and she explicitly states that this planet carries no life, no human life, despite the certain claims of alleged contactees. Semjase explains that they have gone into our villages or cities to purchase a camera that is similar to Billy's. For one reason or another, Semjase did go and purchase a camera, although Billy had his own. I forget exactly what the particular reason was for that. Maybe to produce pictures that we could use, since they have a different kind of technology, I'm sure, for photography. When the Plowren are in our cities and our villages, they use an electronic device that protects them from the vibrations of the Earth humans. We've talked about that before. The Plowren can't be within 90 meters of an Earth human without being negatively affected by our auric vibrations. Anyway, the flight to Venus doesn't take very long, so Billy has just enough time to examine in more detail the equipment for making the photos. What the Plowren have done is they've set up a viewing screen for Billy, which he will use to take these pictures. And Billy gets pictures first of these huge, dense clouds that exist over Venus. And Semjase says that Venus is in a stage of early development of primitive life. And Semjase explains that there are still some things here about which Billy will have to maintain silence. So there's something about Venus which they won't tell us yet, which they can't tell us, because it would negatively affect our development. And Billy says that the cloud cover of Venus is unbelievably deep, many kilometers. They have the surface of Venus displayed on two different screens, and everything looks bare and lifeless. Semjase's ship goes around Venus a number of times, and certain observations are made that they can't mention. And then after their trip around Venus, her ship travels to Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Mars. On these planets, they say, are existing forms of life which are of an entirely different nature from that of humans. And in their low existence, they also are completely uninterested in the humans of Earth. However, there are existing stations of extraterrestrial intelligences which exhibit human forms. They didn't tell us much after that, so there are ET stations in our solar system. After their trip around to these various planets in our system, Semjase's ship travels back to Earth, and Billy can see 5 objects which are extraterrestrial spacecraft. And only one of these 5 objects belongs to Semjase's people, where the other 4 spaceships belong to other races who are here to watch the Apollo-Soyuz hookup. While Billy is looking at the Soyuz capsule, he's very disturbed. He says it looks to him like a metallic flying coffin. And Semjase says to him, she says, you are still not able to solve the tension with your own thoughts, which trace far back to a past life. Evidently, Billy has had a past life where he's had a bad experience as an astronaut in a primitive spacecraft. That's the conclusion I've come to. Semjase goes on to say that the technology of the Pleiaren are 3,500 years ahead of our development. And without another word, she sets the beam ship into motion again. And already a few minutes later, the Earth is way off in the background. It shrunk to the size of a light object, shimmering in a bluishness through space. Billy says the following. He says, I can't describe the infinite vastness and size and the splendor and the beauty of the universe that stretches out before me. The words fail me. Semjase is sitting very attentively before her instrument panels, steering knowingly and carefully in the direction of the huge sphere which looks like a small planet. Semjase steers her ship into a gap which is opening in this huge sphere, and her craft enters into a hangar, and innumerable beam ships of the same type are standing there in orderly rows. And Billy asks, how big is this spaceship, Semjase? Semjase says, it's big. It's very big, and it's the largest of its type. It's truly a special ship which embodies all the technologies known to us all together in its own perfect world. A world that's able to fly in itself contains a complete and inhabited city of 141,000 inhabitants. I wanted to read from Contact 31 a few things that Billy has said and that I've kind of alluded to in my little summary there. Billy says, Semjase, who sits in her oddly shaped, comfortable chair and directs the beam ship through the darkness of space, in which billions of different glimmering stars of many sizes twinkle, 1,000 times clearer and more distinctly than they can be seen from Earth. A truly fantastic image that I will never forget. This is heaven as it lives and breathes among the large and small stars of the Milky Way in immeasurable beauty and size and 1,000 other things. Everything is simply fantastic. And only now do I have an idea of the immense size and the magnificence of the universe. On the first flight, and also for the previous hours, I had not observed it well enough, because I was caught and dominated by many other things. But now I look at everything in peace and with clear eyes, and I can't describe the infinite vastness and size and the splendor and beauty of the universe that stretches out before me. The words fail me. It can only be seen and understood. And suddenly I feel free and light and elevated above the struggle of everyday life on Earth, where I always feel so strange and out of place. Here that feeling is simply gone, and everything is different in me. I feel really good and at home here. I don't know why, but it really is so. I am detached from earthly concerns, worries, and problems. I feel free. Then Semjase suddenly interrupts my thoughts and considerations. Semjase says, you are moving towards solving your puzzle much faster than I had expected. I have overheard your personal thoughts since they have been set out so strongly. You are very quickly beginning to understand, and that is good. Now look there to the front. there is our great spacer, which will take us aboard. Billy goes on to describe here. He says, at a distance difficult for me to estimate, a huge metal sphere is hanging in the darkness of space, reflecting only weakly the light of the sun. Very slowly now the speed of the beam ship decreases. Semjase is sitting very attentively before her instrument panels, steering knowingly and carefully in the direction of the huge sphere, which looks to me like a small planet. I can see way down in the lower third, a little to the left, a big gap is opening laterally, which I soon recognize as an entrance hatch. It's doubtlessly a hangar into which we are now slowly flying. Innumerable beam ships of the same types as ours are standing there, in orderly rows by rank and file, and only 100 by 100 meter square in the hangar entrance is cleared. I look back at the hangar entrance and can see now a wall is moving from bottom to top, closing the entrance. Everything all around is now brightly illuminated, and the light, which is the blue light, seems to come directly from the walls. The whole hangar is huge, and this spherical spaceship, judging by interior spaces, has to be gigantic. Well, that's the mothership, and I'll probably pick up there next time in the actual contact. I'm going to play a clip now from a YouTube that's called Mercury, Venus, the two most hostile planets in the solar system.
Mercury and Venus, two hostile worlds that suffered very different fates. One very much alive and seething with treacherous forces of nature. The other, a planetary carcass, gouged by millions of high-velocity impacts. Both demonstrate the true horrors of planets gone wrong. Mercury and Venus, the inner planets. Along with Earth and Mars, Mercury and Venus make up our inner solar system. Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, these planets farthest from the Sun, make up the gaseous outer worlds of the solar system. Over 4 billion years, the inner planets bound enough interstellar debris to become rock solid.
Why do we study planets? Why do we study astronomy at all? We someday need to go beyond the planet Earth if we expect to survive as a species for a very long time. And we need to know what's out there and what the nature of the universe is.
We're studying worlds where things are exotic, but the basic processes of physics and chemistry at work are really the same that we see here on Earth.
Millions of miles separate us from our rocky cousins. But a tour around Venus and Mercury reveals a common DNA.
We can go to Mercury and Venus and really look at these as places, as worlds with their own histories, and then contextualize our own planet's history.
Venus is the 6th largest planet in the solar system. At its closest, it is 26 million miles away from Earth. A year on Venus lasts 225 Earth days. And if you weighed 150 pounds on Earth, you'd weigh 136 on Venus. Venus, when the ancient Romans looked up, they were captivated by its commanding presence. They named the planet after their serene goddess of love and beauty.
It's such a beautiful presence in the sky. It seems obvious the connection there.
Venus has long been considered our sister planet because of its closeness in composition, gravity, density, and size.
Venus and Earth are almost twins in a lot of ways. They're almost the same size. Venus is slightly smaller than Earth. So if Earth was a regulation basketball, Venus is a soccer ball, slightly smaller. And Venus is the closest planet to Earth. So for a long time, it was thought of literally as a twin planet.
For ages, scientists thought this twin, like Earth, was a planet covered with deep oceans, lush rainforests, and had a climate that would give credibility to the notion that intelligent life could exist there.
Before the space age, people thought it might be very Earth-like on Venus. But the paradox is when we actually got to Venus and started exploring it, the conditions there are so different.
It turned out Venus was less of an exotic sister to Earth and more of an evil twin.
So here you have two very similar planets in their sort of bulk properties, but they've evolved to such different states. And that creates an interesting problem in understanding planetary evolution, a sort of controlled experiment. Take these two similar planets and let them go for 4 billion years, and then why do they end up so different?
First, some of the basic differences. Venus has been hit hard with meteors. One so strong that some scientists think it may have reversed the planet's rotation.
Venus has a very slow rotation, and it has what we call a retrograde rotation. So it spins backwards compared to the direction of spin of all the other planets.
Because of this retrograde rotation, the sun rises in the west and sets in the east. And the Venusian days are long ones. The amount of time from one sunrise to the next is about 8 Earth months. But the orbital pattern and long days aren't what make Venus so intolerable. In part, it's the wicked climate. With a surface temperature of 900 degrees Fahrenheit, Venus is the hottest planet in the solar system. Travelers there would have their trip cut short in no time.
It would take a matter of seconds, maybe 1 second before they were gone, roasted to death.
If you're an astronaut sitting on Venus without a spacesuit, then your skin's going to crisp up. You're going to cook just like a turkey in an oven, except much faster even.
The unforgiving heat wave is created by a process called the greenhouse effect, the identical process that keeps Earth's climate in check and teeming with life. But a closer look at Venus tells us how this common trait can be a cycle of life and a cycle of death. Today, our own temperature is on the rise, and scientists found the possible cause behind it up on Venus.
Global warming is a result of greenhouse gases that are growing and growing and growing, and therefore we're getting hotter and hotter. When we looked at Venus, we said, aha, here it is actually happening.
In the 1990s, after the Magellan spacecraft was launched, planetary watchdogs began turning to Venus to surmise just how bad it could get here on Earth.
Space exploration has told us a lot about the Earth and the environment it's in. And in fact, the greenhouse effect that everybody's talking about with global warming was actually discovered on Venus.
What they found out about Venus shed new light on how fragile Earth's greenhouse effect really is.
And Venus didn't always used to be this hot. We think that early in its history, it was more Earth-like on the surface, and it lost its oceans due to what we call a runaway greenhouse effect. So Venus is an example that certainly that global change can happen on a planet, and it's sort of a worst-case scenario. We don't have to turn Earth into Venus before we're in trouble. We just have to move a little bit in that direction. And we are moving in that direction. But the real value of studying Venus, it allows us to test our climate models.
Through computerized general circulation models, or GCMs, scientists were able to calculate temperature increases on Earth based on the amount of greenhouse gases on Venus. So just how does Venus's greenhouse effect work and make the planet so hot? This is Biosphere 2. Located along the foothills of Arizona's Santa Catalina Mountains, it was built by a group of researchers to explore the idea of colonizing other planets. It is the largest greenhouse on Earth.
Biosphere is a perfect example of a greenhouse because it's a big building with glass panes that let the sun in, and the air is really hot in here.
The solar rays that penetrate the glass panes cause the temperature inside to rise.
The air heats up, but then the air cannot escape, cannot move vertically into the atmosphere because of the walls.
The windows trap the heat, warm the building, and provide the plants and trees with a livable climate. On Venus, greenhouse gases don't exactly trap the sun's heat, but they greatly slow the rate at which it can escape.
The greenhouse effect on any planet is a situation where the surface temperature becomes hotter because of gases in the atmosphere that trap the heat while letting in the sunlight.
These same greenhouse gases that would prove to be fatal to us on Venus are essential to life on Earth.
Without the greenhouse effect, the average temperature would be far below freezing, the oceans would be totally or almost totally frozen, and it's not even clear if life would exist on the Earth.
We talked about how hot it was, but why is it so hot? The answer has to do with the atmospheric composition. It's almost all carbon dioxide there.
Carbon dioxide, or CO2, makes up 95% of the Venusian atmosphere, and that high volume of gas traps more heat.
That's going to give you a strong greenhouse effect, and that's going to make it really hot. And that's why it's so hot on Venus. It's an extreme example of global warming.
On Venus, volcanoes are the natural spring source for CO2 and other gases. It's a process atmospheric chemist Jeff Sutton studies on Earth at Hawaii's Kilauea volcano. Deep below the surface, atomic compounds ignite during volcanic activity to form CO2. The gas is born from the pressure created by the heat of molten rock, or magma.
It rises towards the surface and reaches the summit magma storage complex. The pressure is decreased on the magma, and the effect of that is to allow gases that are trapped under the very high pressure to be released and bubble out.
The Venusian surface would likely have cracks in the lava similar to these vents, where gases escape into the airstream.
Somewhere between 8,000 and 30,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide boil out of the magma chamber each day. And it amounts to something on the order of 3.5 to 5 million tons per year.
And that's just one volcano here on Earth. Venus has more active volcanoes, and that means more heat-bouncing gases.
So all the CO2 just builds up in the atmosphere on Venus, which just makes it hotter and hotter.
The 900-degree heat isn't the only trait that makes Earth's twin seem a menace. 30 miles above the scorching ground of Venus, there's havoc occurring on the planet that makes 900 degrees Fahrenheit feel like a cold front. Electrical mayhem, where split-second jolts can reach 50,000 degrees. Each spark of light contains 100 million volts of electricity. Lightning occurs on both Earth and Venus when electrical charges store up enough energy until they release a spark. Mears Oppenheim teaches planetary physics to students at Boston University. And researchers like him get in on the action at Boston's Museum of Science. In their caged lighting exhibit, 30-foot-high domes motor up to simulate how lightning is generated on Venus. And then it's showtime.
So look at this. We're generating so many millions of volts on these domes that voltage has to escape. And it's actually ripping molecules in the air apart.
The air in the domes, like within the Venusian clouds, stirs up the electrical distribution of tiny atomic molecules.
So the ripped molecules make that light as they reassemble themselves, and that's what a lightning bolt is.
Cosmic particles from exploding stars way out in the galaxy trigger lightning. When these hit the atmosphere, they provide that spark.
These are particles that come from way out in the universe into the atmosphere and cause a shower of charged particles. And on Venus, you'd probably have real lightning to the extreme extent. It can contain enormous amounts of energy and go for miles and miles.
On average, lightning hits the Earth more than 3.1 billion times a year. The number of times lightning hits the ground on Venus? 0. The atmospheric pressure on Venus is 90 times greater than on Earth because the weight of the atmosphere created by gases is heavier. This prevents Venusian lightning from hitting hard ground. Instead, it is restrained to the clouds.
There's just too much resistance in that very thick air for a lightning bolt to get through. It's much easier for lightning to discharge from cloud to cloud.
And besides appearance, there's little else that's Earth-like about Venusian clouds. In fact, the main ingredient that creates them is toxic enough to burn through human flesh. From Earth, you might be able to see Venus twinkle in the morning and evening skies like a star.
Definitely not a wallflower. It's so bright in our sky, not just because it's the closest planet to us, but because it's the most reflective planet. Because it turns out Venus is completely covered in these bright reflective clouds.
80% of the sun's light bounces off the clouds that blanket the planet. But even in the clouds, Venus, our so-called twin planet, manages to show an evil nature.
And we know that the clouds of Venus are made out of sulfuric acid, basically like battery acid. And that sulfuric acid is made by sulfur dioxide coming out of volcanoes on the surface.
Like its greenhouse cousin, carbon dioxide, or CO2, gas pressure pushes sulfur dioxide to the surface through volcanic vents. It's the same gas chemist Jeff Sutton monitors carefully at Hawaii's Kilauea volcano.
The gases, the sulfur dioxide in particular, is a noxious, toxic gas, and we wear gas masks to protect our lungs and our airway because sulfur dioxide combines with moisture in your nose and throat and forms sulfuric acid.
Sulfuric acid is nasty stuff. You don't want to splash battery acid on you. You know, you're careful not to do that. It's basically the same stuff. So it would not be good to suddenly stick your hand into the Venus cloud.
So if a traveler to Venus could survive the acidic clouds, the lightning bolts, the toxic air, and the heat, just how would the Venusian surface look? Volcanologist Jeff Burns with the United States Geological Survey, or USGS, circles the globe to understand what drives volcanic activity on the inner planets. When Burns imagines the surface of Venus, he considers the dark, eerie wasteland of Kilauea's lava fields on the big island of Hawaii.
It's very instructive to be able to come here and study this volcano to compare it to volcanism that has occurred on the surface of Venus. we can actually come out here to the field and study things. We can actually take samples and look at them in detail.
Geologists expect the amount of volcanoes on Venus far outnumbers the 1,500 or so on Earth.
Some estimates range from 100,000 to over 1 million volcanic features on Venus.
With that many volcanoes, lava rock makes up 70% of the Venusian surface, just like it makes up much of Kilauea's terrain. The ground becomes solid when the lava cools into hard rock.
Having a rock on Earth is our best analog for trying to understand rocks on the other planets. Basaltic rocks are the most similar to the Venusian plains.
Basalt is the most common type of lava rock found on Venus and throughout the inner solar system. The minerals freeze into glass and small crystals, a total transformation from what lava looks like when it streams out of the volcano.
When lava is actively flowing across the surface, it's incandescent and typically looks red. Now, quickly it'll form a silvery sheen over the top of it, and then over a period of a few weeks will turn black, such as the lava we see around me here.
At 5 miles high, Mont Mons is the largest volcano on Venus. And it's left some tremendous lava channels in its wake, just like Kilauea did.
Now, as you can see, the structure, we have levees here on the sides, and then internal structures as well. This is similar, perhaps, to how large channels called canali formed on the surface of Venus. However, they formed at a much larger scale.
Large enough to create seemingly endless miles of canali across the Venusian landscape. Consistent in both width and depth, the canali are much longer on Venus than on Hawaii because of environmental conditions on the planet. The dense atmosphere and hot temperature slows the magma from cooling into solid rock. And with little wind and no rain to further cool the magma, lava can cut through the surface for months after an eruption before it hardens.
On Venus, if you did see layering, you would expect to see layer after layer of volcanic rocks that would all be relatively black and basaltic in composition. You would probably see little bits of color due to potentially oxidized iron, which would look red. Typically, basaltic lava flows are glassy enough that, in fact, you would actually cut your hand. They can be extremely sharp. They tend to quench and form glass.
And then there are the skies. That heavy Venusian cloud cover diffuses most of the direct sunlight.
So it would be a lot darker on the surface of Venus during the day than it would be here on Earth. Also, because the light is scattered very efficiently, you tend to lose shadows. So everything is lit fairly consistently across the surface. And then additionally, because of the composition of the atmosphere, everything would tend to have more of an orangish tinge to it.
Besides canyons, jagged mountain ranges scrape the Venusian skies. The planet's highest peak is on Maxwell Mons.
Maxwell is about 35,000 feet high, which puts it at a healthy distance above Mount Everest or any mountain on Earth. Everest is something like 28,000 feet high. So it's definitely larger than anything on Earth.
Our sister planet seems to have outdone one of our 7 natural wonders. But how would the Venusian terrain measure up against another geologic feature, our canyons? The Grand Canyon, a great chasm eroded over 250 million years by the Colorado River.
When the Colorado Plateau was uplifted millions of years ago, it gave the water more energy to cut back through the canyon and wear away the rocks.
The vast canyons on Venus may have also been formed by erosion, but not by a river.
Volcanic systems can erode canyons by having fluid flow. If it's very fluid, not very viscous, materials can erode similar to water. And the Grand Canyon is only part of the Colorado River system, but even looking at the Colorado River system as a whole is not nearly as long as the longest channels on Venus.
Had the ancient Romans known about the volcanoes, acidic clouds, lightning bolts, toxic air, and that scorching heat, perhaps they may have named our evil twin planet after something other than their goddess of beauty and love.
There's irony there because, of course, the Greeks and Romans didn't know anything about the conditions on Venus, and then here we are a couple thousand years later, and we're actually exploring this place, and, well, it's not quite so nice according to our taste.
But how do the dangers found on our sister planet compare to the cosmic violence on Mercury? million miles away from Earth, Mercury's dust-covered hills and empty plains stretch as far as the naked eye can see.
It's a colorless body. I mean, it does not have really any colors like you see on Mars or the Earth or even Venus for that matter.
Dr. Robert Strong with the University of Arizona's Lunar and Planetary Lab has been a chief authority on planetary geology for more than 35 years.
Mercury is the innermost planet, and it's quite different than anything else in the solar system.
At 36 million miles, Mercury is the closest planet to the Sun. The planet has no known moons. Mercury has no atmosphere. And it's a naked eye planet, visible on Earth during the twilight hours. With a diameter 60% smaller than Earth, Mercury is the solar system's scrawniest planet. Much too small to generate the strong gravitational field needed to retain an atmosphere.
Gravity depends upon the mass of the object, on the mass. So the larger the mass, the more the gravity. So on Mercury, the gravity is less on there.
Since the planet's gravity is so weak, if you weighed 150 pounds on Earth, you'd only weigh 57 pounds on Mercury. Planet size matters when it comes to the internal heat needed to sustain geologic activity.
The internal convection currents that drive geology stop, and in general, it just freezes up and there's no way to sustain that geological activity. And that happened to Mercury a long time ago, probably after less than 1 billion years of its life.
The days when the planet beat with a strong pulse that produced volcanic and tectonic Mercury quakes are long gone.
Is Mercury a dead planet? Depends on what you mean by dead. Is it internally active now? Probably not. It's probably not active at all.
It is essentially a dead planet and has been dead for about 4 billion years.
For a near lifeless planet, Mercury still has some movement. Named by the ancient Romans after the swift-footed messenger god, Mercury orbits the Sun in 88 Earth days, the fastest of any planet. But when it comes to the time it takes Mercury to spin on its own axis, the planet holds the record for being the slowest. Length of time, around 180 Earth days, about half a year.
Sorry about that, folks. I had myself muted there. That's a very interesting clip. At another time, we can probably play a little bit more of that. I'd like to pick up where Semjase is talking about the mothership. She says it's big. It's even very big, and it's the largest of its type. It is truly a special ship which embodies all the technologies known to us. Altogether, it's its own perfect world, a world that is able to fly. In itself, it contains a complete inhabited city of 141,000 inhabitants. Everything needed for living and can be produced inside the ship, and it's absolutely independent of anything of any kind from outside its boundary. The spaceship represents our latest development and has been working together with other ones of the same kind for 4 years now in Earth's chronology. They are finding useful applications as self-sustained expeditionary ships for intergalactic order keeping. They are able to move within all times and spaces, and for them, negotiating the barrier between universes is no longer an obstacle, whereby an all-universal community made of countless life forms can come into existence. After only 4 years in the possession of this great technology, we are regrettably still only in the early stages of our great task. And Billy says, that is still fantastic. If I understood what you have just explained, you are able, with this great ship as well as with others of the same type, to shift from one universe to another. Sure, you have understood me correctly. However, this only applies to aligned universes. Then tell me the other thing. You have once told me that you know Asked very well. Semjase says, certainly. Billy says, please don't make me a bargain for each separate answer from you. Where do you know Asked from? And what do you know about her and her race? And what do you know about their connection with me? Semjase says, there are no secrets. Asked has explained everything to me, so I know that you stood together in contact until about a decade ago. All the details are known to me, as well as your time travels into the past, through which you were thoroughly cured of all the heresies of the religions which exist among you. And Billy says, you are shockingly open, Semjase, considering that Asked has strictly forbidden me to speak about this. Before she would permit me to do so by a sign. And Semjase says, you have just received that sign. And Billy asks her, are you that sign? Have you just given me the sign? She says, and evidently that is Billy's sign. He is allowed now to give this information out about the heresies of our religions. So let me play a bit of a clip that'll tell us a little bit more about Asked.
Pleiadian Pleasure and Contact Reports, Conversations, Volume 1, pages 303 to 308. Asked's acquaintanceship, just as with the introductory explanation. All of the following was written down together and with Asked's help. Asked constituted a very good memory aid for me. Furthermore, she was in a position, by means of some sort of apparatuses, to reproduce words, true to the original words, which had already been spoken a long time ago, whereby, with the writing down of the following reports, I am in a position to reproduce truthfully, word for word, every single spoken word and every sentence from her side or from my side. The apparatus, which Asked has at her disposal for such purposes, is able to again bring forth and record every single jot of a conversation out of her unconscious, or transfer it as thought impulses. Morali, the 30th of August, 1964. It was my 18th close sighting of beam ships, when I was picked up on February 3, 1953, to make Asked's acquaintance. I was picked up by a disk in the early second hour of the morning at a place which had been precisely communicated to me shortly before, which, however, Spot had already arranged with me weeks earlier, so that on day X only the actual exact point had to be named. Bitter cold prevailed at this early morning hour as I made my way to the favorite place of my thoughts, where I was often alone for so many hours and where, 16 days earlier, Spot also announced to me the acquaintanceship with Ascot, which was intended to occur on this night. In spite of the sharp cold, I broke out in a sweat as I climbed the small hill on which the agreed place was situated. Arriving there, I did not have to wait long for some sort of thing which was still supposed to come there, because, arriving on the dome of the hill, I immediately saw a bright light plunge down from the sky and set down not far from me on the frozen hard ground. The bright light went out, and I saw a matte silver and discus-shaped object, which stood majestically quiet on 3 landing spheres and appeared to wait for me. The disc landing spheres were completely foreign to me, because I had never seen such things with that kind of form before. After a short telepathic invitation, I approached the ship as if under a gentle compulsion, and at once was lifted in through an opening, just as if by ghostly hands, because there was neither a lift nor some sort of other entrance possibility.
Spoth. Sorry, folks. Muted again. I had already either early or repeatedly experienced that with Spoth each time he brought me into his pear-shaped craft. However, the interior arrangement of this ship was fundamentally different in comparison to that of Spoth. There was only one single armchair present. Also, I was not able to see anyone, and the ship was quite obviously unmanned and was remotely steered somehow. So without being asked, I sat in the single but therefore very comfortable armchair. Even before I could sit properly, an enormous change occurred, a change which in my life up to this point had always appeared to me as a dream and fantasy. The bright light which came from everywhere in the interior of the ship suddenly went out, and then suddenly I seemed to be sitting outdoors. No longer could anything at all of the ship and the entire setup be perceived, and when in a reflex motion I drew my left hand in front of my eyes, I was no longer able to see it. The entire ship and myself had simply, quite suddenly, become invisible. Anyway, Billy goes on to explain that he ends up in Jordan, and then him and Ascot travel to Egypt, where he travels under the Great Pyramid into these old cubicle constructions, and he sees the Giza intelligences, a story which we've talked about before. I just wanted to bring that to mind again. So let me pick back on Contact 31. Billy says, "Of course, I have just been waiting for permission to speak about it and have preserved it all very well, but how does it actually happen that you know Ascot?" Semjase then explains how she knows Ascot. "After the predetermined break-off of her contacts with you in India in 1964, which were being led in collaboration with us in the High Council, she allied herself with our High Council, and from that resulted a quicker contact and a quicker operation. With the help of her race from the Tao universe, we came into possession of knowledge of higher technical capabilities and received the most exact data for the development of these great spaceships, which we have been using, as I said, for 4 of your Earth years now. For Ascot's people, the handing over of this data was no problem, because they had mastered the way of overcoming distances with these ships more than 700 years ago. In Earth years, Ascot's race is about 350 years ahead of us. in developing regarding all the technical fields. This small time interval no longer plays so divisive a role when a certain level of development is reached in every field, so it was only natural that they would assist us with these. Very important findings and achievements that they would impart with us the knowledge necessary to build these great spaceships. Just a kind of quick review, Asket. Her people are called the Timmers. They reside in the Tao universe. The Tao universe is a parallel universe to ours. Both our universe and the Tao universe were created 46 trillion years ago in something which was pretty much analogous to what our scientists call the Big Bang. Asket's people and the Plejaren, they both descend from the root race, the Lyrians, which came into the Milky Way galaxy many millions of years ago, possibly billions of years ago, under the leadership of Nocodamian. Nocodamian is the same spirit form that's currently in Edward Albert Meyer. The spirit form has incarnated on the earth as Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel, and Muhammad. And this time is Billy Edward Albert Meyer, known as Beam. And his mission that he's currently on is to place in written form these ancient universal teaching called the teaching of the Spirit, the teaching of life. And as we were on last show, Contact Report 10 is the beginnings of the teachings of the Spirit. In Contact Report 31 tonight, we're exploring Billy's time on the Great Mothership. So let's pick back up there. Billy says, "You say that so strangely and with a funny smile. Why is that?" Semjase, "Just so." Billy says, "Once again, you have a secret to hide." "Well, if you don't want to talk about it, then keep it to yourself. But I'm interested in knowing the dimensions of this space giant. Can you at least tell me the mean diameter in meters?" So Semjase gives him the diameter of the mothership, which is 17,182 meters. Billy says he's gobsmacked by that. Semjase says, "Then recover yourself quickly, for you will soon see and hear many other fantastic things." Semjase says, Billy says, "It's done already. I only have to really digest it first." "That is simply fantastic. I felt as if I had spun into the ground. It is, as speaking of spinning the ground, I have heard such a strange story, and I would like to ask you for an explanation. Mr. Veit from Wiesbaden brought a letter from a certain Ella or Elsa Schroeder or something like that, in which she described a situation she had observed in Turkey some time ago. A woman was digging with a peculiar-looking power shovel for something that she took out of the ground, something that looked like a cylinder. The woman then took the cylinder with her and disappeared into a UFO, which she then ascended into the sky overhead. Moreover, this young woman had spoken with the quote-unquote UFO woman, who told her that her name was Semjase, or Semjase, or something similar. Can you tell me anything about this story, whether you know about it?" And Semjase, smiling, says, Sure. This event is known to me. However, it didn't happen in Turkey, but in Iran, near a city called Zahedin. Early one morning, I have, luckily, while I was shielded from vibrations, dug out from the earth a time spiral, which was of great importance. We had been searching for it for 3 years until we finally found it. It was a time projectile for research purposes. Here, this is the projectile. Semjase brings out a conical spiral-shaped device. This also was the reason why we were going to the edge of the universe now, because this device came from another universe. Billy said, "So that's what happened. And when did you dig this thing up?" Semjase said, "In the first month of the year, but now let's leave our ship. because the room is atmospherically prepared for you as well. We are in a security room which is fully atmospherically pressurized, even when the gaps are open from outer space. The whole shape is nevertheless sealed off from the actual living area by invisible barriers, so that security is truly comprehensive. And the next part of the contact here starts talking about what it's like inside this great mothership. We let ourselves float through the shaft by the transport beam and stand on the metal floor of the great spacer. For the first time since I am outside the beam ship, I realize that the cleared landing space of about 100 times 100 meters is surrounded by glass-clear walls, and that innumerable other small beam ships are beyond these walls. Between these parked ships, many human beings are rushing along, quite obviously involved with the various ships. But I also see walking mechanical figures, quite obviously robotic, which as well are hurryingly, quite busily along, executing various tasks. Very far beyond, I am just able to see bigger beam ships, which have completely different shapes from the ones heretofore known to me. Semjase occupies herself with a small device in her hand, and I see before us the transparent wall opens and reveals an entrance. Then, completely silently, comes a floating vehicle, not bigger in size than a Volkswagen car. It floats about 20 centimeters above the floor and is equipped with very comfortable seats on the top. Semjase asks me to take one of the seats beside her, and the peculiar moving vehicle floats away and slowly rises higher and higher. I look back and watch how the transparent wall closes up again after our beam ship is taken by the previously seen robots into the main hangar wall. The main hangar wall seems to take up the whole lower third part of the giant spaceship for its complete diameter up to a height of about 600 to 800 meters, 2,400 feet. The ceiling above, like the walls, also radiates a bluish light which seems like the sky to me. And if I am not mistaken, there is a big opening above, exactly in the center of the ceiling. Soon I can see that this is so as we head in this direction in our floating transportation vehicle, and we climb up inside this opening. Also inside the shaft is the same gentle blue illumination coming from the walls. For minutes we climb up with increasing speed until Semjase suddenly stops the floating vehicle and docks into a side compartment in the wall. In here, there is an open space of approximately 2,000 times 1,000 meters. I feel myself completely transported into a magical world. Wherever I look, I see green fields, trees, shrubs, flowers. A real little Garden of Eden in the space giant. So, they're inside the great mothership. They're in this beautiful area where there's trees, plants, etc. Maybe that'll be a good time to pick up next time. You've been listening to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. Have a good evening.